During the colonial period, the British Empire knew that punishments were an important part of which they had to assert dominance. In this video, we're going to look at some of the most brutal punishments that the British Empire used during the colonial period. Flogging was one of the most brutal forms of punishment that was used by the British during the colonial period. The offender would be subjected to lashings, ruthless beatings with a whip, or as they call it, a cat o' nine tails, a whip that has multiple tails or thongs. The lashes would strike and dig the victim's bare skin, resulting in excruciating pain and lacerations that often left mean scars that were permanent. Moreover, flogging was often carried out in public as a show of public humiliation and deterrence. This physical and psychological trauma inflicted by flogging was intended to break the spirit of the individual and serve as a warning to others who might rebel against the authority of the British Empire. If that wasn't enough, public executions were a brutal form of punishment that took it up a notch. During the colonial period, the Britishers were fond of hangings and beheading. The offender would be publicly executed, almost like a sick show in the middle of the town or other designated areas, with crowds of people gathered around the venue to witness the event. These were set up to intimidate and subjugate the population. These executions were swift and brutal, delivering a violent end that left a lasting impact on those who witnessed it. Now, there was another one known as pressing. It was a barbaric form of punishment used by the British Empire. The accused would be laid down on the ground, and as the name suggests, heavy weights or stones or iron slabs would be placed upon their chest or body. This was slow as the weight would increase, causing immense pressure, which eventually crushes the victim's organs. This method made the offender feel excruciating pain, suffocation, and ultimately a slow and torturous death. Pressing was also an interrogation tactic to extract confessions or punish those accused of serious crimes. Black waters or similar locations was where convicts were transported in a punishment. During the colonial period, convicts were forcibly relocated to distant penal colonies where they were forced to live in harsh conditions and grueling labor. The arduous journey on hell ships led to many deaths from disease, malnutrition, and mistreatment. Upon arrival, convicts faced brutal treatment, including long hours of labor, inadequate living conditions, and severe punishments for disobedience. The combination of harsh labor, deplorable living conditions, and constant abuse resulted in high mortality rates among the convicts. Transportation served as a means of social control, but its implementation caused immense suffering and loss of life. During the colonial period, the British Empire implemented policies of forced labor and starvation as a means of controlling and exploiting indigenous populations. Indigenous individuals were forcibly taken from their lands and subjected to grueling labor on plantations or in mines, working under harsh conditions with little to no access to proper nutrition. The meager rations provided were often inadequate, leading to malnutrition, starvation, and weakened immune systems. Many lost their lives due to exhaustion, diseases associated with malnutrition, and the overall brutal treatment they endured. This systematic exploitation of labor and deliberate deprivation of basic necessities caused immense suffering and contributed to the decimation of indigenous communities. British colonial authorities resorted to torture and interrogation methods to maintain control and suppress any form of rebellion or resistance. The goal was to extract information, gather intelligence, and instill fear among the colonized population. Torture techniques were employed by the British included waterboarding, a method in which a cloth would be placed over the face of the victim and water poured over it to simulate drowning, causing immense distress and asphyxiation. Beatings, electric shocks, and other forms of physical torture were also used to inflict pain and force confessions. Psychological torment such as isolation, threats, and intimidation was another tactic employed to break the spirit and will of the individuals under interrogation. These brutal methods violated human rights, caused severe physical and psychological trauma, and were intended to intimidate and subjugate the colonized populations. It's not surprising that the British Empire was involved in numerous massacres against indigenous populations as part of its conquest and control. These brutal acts of violence often took place during military campaigns or as a response to resistance movements. Indigenous villages would be attacked, resulting in indiscriminate killings, looting, and the destruction of homes and infrastructure. The massacres caused widespread death, suffering, and displacement among the indigenous communities, leading to the loss of lives, cultural heritage, and socioeconomic stability. These brutal acts were driven by a desire for territorial expansion, dominance, and the suppression of any perceived threat to British colonial rule. Amputation of limbs, especially hands, was a brutal punishment option for the British Empire to suppress resistance and instill fear and submission. Offenders would have their limbs severed as a public display of power and as a means of permanent disablement. This cruel method aimed to intimidate the colonized population, ensuring compliance and discouraging acts of rebellion. The physical and psychological impact of amputation caused immense pain, trauma, and lifelong disabilities, serving as a reminder of the oppressive nature of colonial rule and the consequences of defiance. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like this video, don't forget to check out the others we have in our playlist.